Canada in Trump's crosshairs. Today, Canada is not facing a military aggression, but it does face the threat of an economic strike challenge. Donald Trump's tariffs are not only an economic nuance, but could take aim at the principles of free and fair trade. This could disrupt supply chains and increase costs for consumers. It could also threaten jobs in key sectors such as oil, gas, steel, aluminum, and agriculture. We see this as a consequence of MAGA ideology. We will make America strong again. We will make America wealthy again. But with such risks, can tariffs be as fair as they are claimed to be? Or are they a policy that will have untroubled consequences for America? At the moment, Trump has suspended the threatened tariffs for 30 days. But this suspension remains indefinite before he continues to find new justifications to impose them. Canadian workers, industries, and national prosperity remain at risk. But the Canadian government is showing that it is not a nation willing to cave in. Mr. Trump's pressure on Canada is bringing Canada-China relations closer. The main focus of their relations is oil exports. Canada is the largest supplier of heavy crude oil to American refineries, exporting about 4 million barrels per day. This makes it the largest overall exporter of crude oil to the United States of America. But danger bells are ringing that the balance may be shifting. Well, to say the least, fracking is a controversial topic, but Canada's shale oil fields could provide a boom to our energy sector. Even if the tariff on Canadian crude is reduced, the added costs will make it more expensive for U.S. refiners to refine crude, giving European and Asian rivals a competitive advantage. Chinese refiners would be more than happy to buy Canadian and Mexican oil, which has become too expensive for U.S. refiners. So, could Canada sign a new oil deal with China? And what would Trump's reaction be if such a deal materializes? For answers to these questions and more, our video begins. Almost every day since the completion in May of the expansion of Canada's Trans Mountain Pipeline, which sends almost all of its crude oil to the U.S., tankers filled with crude from the line have passed under Vancouver's Lions Gate Bridge on their way to refineries around the Pacific. These tankers, bound for China and Japan, among other markets, marked a significant shift for Canada, which had long been forced to export its vast oil flows exclusively to the U.S. While President Donald Trump's tariff threats highlighted the risk of this dependence, the success of the $34 billion Trans Mountain expansion was fueling Canada's desire to further separate from its unpredictable neighbor and play a bigger role in global oil markets. Adam Wuss, a former investment banker and founder and chairman of oil producer Strathcona Resources, said Trans Mountain was a good start. So, this pipeline could be a means for Canada to open up more to China, especially in this critical period when Trump is escalating his threats. Canada could make an incredible move on oil and make China its most important energy customer. Of course, Canada will face some obstacles in realizing such a goal. In fact, Canada's oil industry has long pushed for more pipelines both to its shores and to the U.S. in order to remove barriers to shipping oil. However, this has been thwarted by opposition from indigenous communities and environmental groups. Trans Mountain expansion and Asian markets. Courts, as well as the country's own federal and provincial governments, have been involved in the pipeline debates. However, these efforts are gaining renewed traction as Canadians recover from Trump's trade offensive, an episode that sparked anger and distrust of the country's southern neighbor and even prompted hockey fans to boo the U.S. national anthem at recent games. Two major pipeline projects in particular are being discussed as ripe for revival. Energy East, which would transport Western Canadian crude oil east to refineries in Ontario and Quebec, and Northern Gateway, which would transport Alberta oil to a Pacific port in northern British Columbia. Energy East would convert an existing natural gas pipeline to carry about 1.1 million barrels of oil per day from Alberta and Saskatchewan to refineries and a shipping terminal in eastern Canada. Most importantly, it would prevent crude oil from passing through the U.S., as Enbridge Inc.'s Line 5 currently does to reach Ontario and Quebec. Northern Gateway was halted by a court in 2016 amid objections from environmental groups and First Nations and was later rejected by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. The approximately 1,178 kilometers line would have run from Alberta to Kitimat, British Columbia, with a capacity of 525,000 barrels per day, providing oil sands producers a way to ship more crude oil to buyers in Asia. Strathcona Resources founder Adam Waterous suggested that the Canadian government should declare an energy emergency to streamline the regulatory process for Energy East and Northern Gateway, start building them in the coming months, and complete them while Trump is in office. Enbridge recently stated that it has no plans to develop Northern Gateway and is instead focused on increasing the capacity of its existing pipeline south. TC Energy, the company behind the former Energy East proposal, declined to comment on any revival of the project. Even with company support, new pipelines would likely take years and billions of dollars to build. The cost of the Trans Mountain expansion, which nearly tripled the line's capacity to 890,000 barrels per day, increased more than sixfold by the time it was completed. Canadian taxpayers largely footed this bill after the Trudeau government purchased the pipeline in 2018 to prevent its cancellation by its original owner, Kinder Morgan. Despite this, opposition to new pipelines remains strong. Keith Stewart, senior energy strategist at Greenpeace Canada, argued that the oil industry is using crises to sideline environmental and health protections. Given these obstacles, one of the quickest and easiest solutions for Canadian oil producers may be to further expand Trans Mountain. Currently, Trans Mountain ships only 720,000 barrels per day, about 80% of its projected capacity, because high tolls from its costly completion make spot shipments uneconomic. Executives believe capacity could be increased by 200,000 to 300,000 barrels per day by boosting pumping power. The dock at the Trans Mountain Terminal currently handles about 480,000 barrels per day, but with added navigational aids allowing nighttime shipping, it could soon reach its planned capacity of 630,000 barrels per day. Any volumes exceeding the dock's capacity flow into Washington state through connected pipelines. Even below full capacity, Trans Mountain is reshaping the global oil market. Increasing amounts of Canadian crude are replacing purchases from sanctioned countries, including China, Iran, and Russia. This shift has also pressured the prices of Middle Eastern and Latin American crudes similar to Canadian heavy oil. Meanwhile, Canadian oil prices had risen and stabilized, at least until Trump's tariff threats. Now, with Trans Mountain back in the spotlight, discussions have reignited over selling more Canadian oil to other countries, especially China. Rising China demand, a new buyer for Canadian oil. According to an analysis by the China Institute at the University of Alberta, China has quickly become a major buyer of Canadian crude oil, thanks to the Trans Mountain expansion. Contrary to analysts' expectations, early data showed that most of this new export capacity was going to China, not California refineries. This marked a significant shift from Canada's long-standing dependence on the U.S. as its dominant oil customer. The timing of this shift was particularly notable given recent tensions in Canada-U.S. relations. Some of these new exports were destined for California, but between May 2024, when the expanded pipeline became operational, and November 2024, $2 billion worth of crude oil went to China. As analysts Lincoln and Realt estimated in their January 24th analysis, this accounted for half of Canada's new exports, signaling China's growing role as a major buyer, regularly purchasing 50% or more of Canada's additional crude supply. U.S. reaction. Risk of economic confrontation. All crude exported through the TMX pipeline has found its largest buyer in Rongsheng Petrochemical, which operates refineries on China's east coast, including an 800,000 barrel per day refinery in Xi'an province. Taking all these details into account, it paints a grim picture for the United States. While the U.S. remains the largest market for Canadian crude, the TMX pipeline has facilitated China's rise as a major buyer. This shift enables Canada to secure higher prices per barrel for its exports from the Pacific Coast and breaks the U.S. monopoly on the Canadian oil sector. If Canada were to decide to sell all its oil to China instead of the U.S., President Donald Trump could face a serious economic shakeup. Ironically, Trump's tariffs, intended to strengthen America's position, may end up accelerating Canada's pivot toward China. At the end of the 30-day suspension period, Trump could exert significant pressure to tilt the balance back in America's favor. However, this crisis is not occurring in isolation. More than 50 years ago, similar concerns about Canada's dependence on the U.S. sparked a major policy debate, culminating in what became known as the third option. Option 3 revisited Canada's search for independence. In 1972, Mitchell Sharp, then Canada's Minister of Foreign Affairs, published Canada-U.S. Relations, Options for the Future. At the time, global politics were shifting, and the U.S. was redefining its national interests. Sharp proposed rethinking Canada's relationship with the United States. While acknowledging the benefits of strong ties with the U.S., he noted that Canadians were becoming increasingly wary of the relationship's direction. Many were supportive of policies aimed at ensuring greater Canadian independence. The key question, Sharp argued, was whether Canada's economic interdependence with the U.S. would put unmanageable pressure on its separate national identity and elements of its sovereignty. For Option 3 to be a viable approach today, Canadians must embrace an independent national identity rooted in democracy, pluralism, the rule of law, and respect for human rights. Such a move would also require a broad consensus that American-style authoritarianism is entirely unacceptable for Canada. Conclusion and next steps. Canada is being pushed toward the third option as the least bad alternative. However, just as in Sharp's time, this path comes at a cost. Independence and democracy do not come for free. Thank you for watching.